Right, we have, now we get into the searing personal questions of Hannah's life. So it all started. So first question is how you got into the track that you're in. Everybody has their own path into the business. What's yours?
Okay. Okay, well, I went to school out here. I went to USC. I did not get into the film program. I applied to the production program. I did not get in it, but I was very interested in film in general. I think, wanted to major in acting, and my parents just said no. So I took like maybe 1 or 2 classes for fun, but I wound up minoring in film, which doesn't do anything for you when you graduate USC. And I didn't have any connections or relationships. I didn't know what an agency was or a management company. I really knew nothing. And I majored in communication, and they didn't really tell me anything. So I applied to.
Right on.
So yes, right on. So I applied to a bunch of jobs on Craigslist actually, and I got a job working in reality TV. I was a receptionist at this company. Run by this guy who created The Biggest Loser, which is basically what kept our lights on there. And it was, it was a job. And it was in the Valley, and I would drive by the Universal lot every day, and I would be like, how do I get on there? Like, how do I get a job like working there? That's where I actually want to be. I lucked into a job actually off one of the talent agencies, which I guess I learned existed while I was in reality TV. United Talent Agency has this like job list that they send around. That's also fairly useless, but I applied to every job on that list for about a year. And I got an interview and got the job working for this guy named Scott Stuber, who at the time had a production company on the Universal lot. He had been running Universal and gotten his own production deal there. Now he runs all the film side of Netflix. But at the time he had his own production company, and I got a job as his third assistant. And so I did that for a few weeks, and then I moved over to these 2 young executives' desks at his company, and I worked answering their phones and reading scripts for them, and I just tried to be a go-getter and do everything that I could to really hustle. And I did that for a few more producers' assistants jobs, and then I got promoted, or I got a job at this company called Good Universe, and I was an executive there. And I worked on, we were making, we had Neighbors come out while I was there, and then we were shooting a movie called The Night Before. So I, did development and stuff like that there, and then kind of like, if whoever went to this before, you said Chris, so like, kind of like what he does, similar kind of job, but at a different company. So I worked at Good Universe, and then I went to worked with this producer named Andrew Lazar, and we had a movie called American Sniper come out while I was working for him. And we made a really tiny movie in Toronto, and I realized that I really hated being on set, and that I didn't want to be an on-set producer, which is kind of like the goal if you're producing, and you kind of want to be making multiple films a year. And I realized that I didn't want to be on set all the time, and that wasn't really the dream job anymore for me. It looked a little different than when I was 21 and was watching Scott Stuber, who was gone 50 weeks out of the year. But anyway, so I've been talking to Aaron Kaplan and Sean Perrone, where I now currently work at their company, Kaplan Perrone, and I knew them, like, I met them generally just through my job and wanting to hire some of their clients, and they started telling me that I should consider working in representation. And at the time, I thought that representation was the evil side of the business. That's what everyone who's not in that area thinks. But they kind of talked me into it, and I knew I didn't want to produce anymore, so it seems like a leap of faith, and I should just try it and see what happens. And I also, I think that working in the producing world, I was starting to get really frustrated with finding young and exciting or new voices, whether they were directors or writers, and not always having an opportunity to work with them because you're kind of confined to the limits of your production company or your studio or your boss or their boss in terms of who you can hire for what job. And what started happening a lot actually was I would find a really cool writer or a really cool director who I wanted to work with, and my boss would say, or Andrew would say, no, I don't think they're right for the job. Or my studio would say, no, we don't think they're right for the job. Or I would bring the writer in and pitch them everything that I had, and they'd say, yeah, I don't want to write any of that stuff. And then they would always go work with someone else who oftentimes I had introduced them to because I was just so excited about them that I would call a bunch of friends and tell them that they should know this person. And then they would go get to hire that person, and I didn't get to work with them. And I realized that if I worked in representation, that I would actually just get to work on everything that people I thought were talented were working on, and I didn't have to get anyone's permission to represent them. So I moved over to Kaplan, Perrone a little over 3 years ago, and I've been there ever since.
So, so the job, 3 years, and how has it evolved for you? What's it? I mean, from what you thought it was going to be to what it is now?
Yeah. Well, when I worked as a producer, if I told my friends, and by friends I just mean other executive friends, other producer friends, if I called them and I said, hey, I read this really great script, you should read it, the writer is really talented, they would read it immediately because I had no skin in the game. So me telling them to read someone was just me being kind. Now, telling people to read something and getting them to actually read it takes forever. It's usually, I mean, like, nobody wants to really read in this town, and it just takes a really long time to push that forward. And so I think when I first started, I was like, well, everyone reads what I tell them to read. So when I become a manager, that'll just be the easy part of the job. But that was actually like, so that was, I think, the first, not surprise, just like, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, but that was a little surprising to me. And then, I think that the other thing is, I think I was also surprised by how rewarding the job is. I think that producing is a pretty unrewarding job. You are constantly putting together your baby, basically, and watching it fall apart and come together over and over again, and you really have to have a very, very big love for doing that. And Andrew does, and he has this passion for it. And I watched one of his movies get greenlit 3 times. The same movie got greenlit 3 times, and it fell apart 3 times. While I was working for him, and he just doesn't bat an eye. He's just like, okay, well, The Rock's out, who are we going to put in? And I'm just sitting there like, oh my God, this thing is like a 10-year-old project that we're like trying to put together again. So I think that that's just, that producing is rewarding in a different way because you have to be, the end result is what makes the whole thing worth it. And I think for me, what I really love about working in representation is I just think that there are a lot more wins to be had with the client. That can happen sooner and in different ways than just the end product of a movie or a TV show. I think that it's a win to sign someone new. It's a win to get them on their first, to get them read, but also, to put them on their first general and put them in a room with a production company that they're excited about, to introduce them to the woman that runs Elizabeth Banks' company or that runs Paul Feig's company, whoever it is, that's always very exciting to them to kind of go on their first we call it water bottle tour. You know, that is a win. It's a win to have people respond to a script and just say that they love it and they even want to meet my client. It's a win. It's a huge win when they book their first job and you get to call them. I mean, that is probably my favorite part of the job is when I have a client who's getting their very, very first job and you get to call them and tell them like, okay, you don't have to work at Starbucks anymore or drive Uber or whatever it is that they're doing to kind of, you know, pay the bills, but that you now get to work full time, you know, doing a job that you really love. I mean, I've had multiple clients tell me like, okay, I don't work anymore because now I just get to do something that I love and I don't really consider it work. And I think that's a very rewarding thing. And then I think beyond that, you know, obviously there's, you know, getting a movie made or a TV show made. I think those are really rare and fewer and farther in between, but there's so many more wins in between, whether it's just getting a job working at Marvel or working at Lucasfilm, or all of those are wins, and I get to experience all of that with my client. And I think was surprising how, like, even though I'm not the one writing those things, it still feels like a really big win for me too.
Yeah, so let's talk about how do you get clients, because most of the people who put their hand up in the room earlier would love to have you represent them. How do you find new people nowadays? What's the, when you say it's exciting finding a new client, how and where? What rocks do you look under?
Yeah.
And how open are you to finding new clients? Like, is your slate, is it a constantly revolving client list, or is it like 6 months of the year I'm not looking for someone and then I am looking for someone? Like, what's that? Explain.
Yeah, I mean, look, like, I think that I've been doing this for 3 years. I have a pretty significant business at this point, but I always read. I'm always willing to read anyone. I definitely do have a lot of things. I couldn't even tell you how many things I have to read right now. But
more than 30, like 40, 50, 100.
Yeah, maybe, like, because it's not. Yeah, probably like 50 right now. But I'll get 10 things sent to me this week. But I think too that it's a bunch of different things. I think. I get query letters all the time, random, you know, just someone found my email address, which apparently is probably very easy to find.
I'll give you later on.
And usually with those, unfortunately, when I first started as a manager, like when I was brand new, that was kind of the only place that I had when I first started to look for clients. So. I would actually say, like, if you're reading the trades and you see like brand new managers popping up here and there, like, they don't have a business yet. So they're kind of really good people to target if you're just trying to like get someone to read you, because they will probably have 50 things to read, but they're very eager to find new people, because, like, you know, when I first started as a manager, I came over. I think there was one woman who I was working with with Andrew, who I just said we should work together. And so I basically had one client to pitch in every meeting, in every in every staff, in anything. So I was constantly like really hustling and really trying to find new people. Now that's changed a little bit, but I would say when I first started, I looked everywhere. I mean, I looked at for directors, I looked at, like, you know, Vimeo short of the week or whatever viral videos we're tracking. I looked at commercials, like I looked at just who directed each season of television that I was excited about. I think with writers, I mean, people get signed off anything these days. You can get signed off a Twitter account. Like, it doesn't really matter. A voice is a voice. I have a lot of executive friends send me people. Usually it is nice if it comes through one mode of, yes, you know, like if there is someone I trust who is sending me something, it doesn't matter if they're an assistant, if they're an agent, if they're a development executive, if they're my mom, who has sent me one or two things that I have had to read. But it's who, and like the way that she's like, oh, I met this woman on a plane and I told her that you'd read her son's script. Like, it's great. But it doesn't happen that often. But anyway, it's usually if there's one filter that is obviously helpful, a lawyer, it can be anyone, but that helps a lot for me. But again, I still read all the query letters that come in, because if there's a log line that just sounds particularly exciting or interesting, like I very rarely will ask for the script, and it's difficult because when you do that, they have to sign a waiver or something to make sure that we're not going to get sued for reading their scripts, and 10 years later one of our clients writes a similar movie or whatever that is. But occasionally we do it, and we have signed people at our company that have I've had, yes, I think this is true. We represent these guys, Neusauer and Weber, who are Academy nominated writers. They wrote The Disaster Artist and 500 Days of Summer and Spectacular Now, and they have a TV show called Daisy Jones that's going to come out on Amazon. I mean, they're some of our biggest clients, and an intern recommended them to Aaron and Sean. So they can come from anywhere. We have a lot of clients that were query letters or were sent through interns. I think the Workaholics guys were found by an intern at whatever production company hired them first. So it definitely happens. And I've had clients send me even like journalists that just write funny articles. So I think, again, like when there's a voice, it can come from anywhere.
Right, and that leads me to the writing aspect of it, because I know, I get people writing to me sort of implying that the only thing holding them back is the gatekeepers, that I can't get represented. And then you read the script, and the script isn't, it's not the gatekeepers that are holding them back. And I know as a writer who's been trying to, battling against gatekeepers for a long time, I used to think that too. And then I looked at my scripts and realized I wasn't working hard. So, and that it was really, if I had a cold hard look in the mirror, it was that my scripts weren't good enough. So let's assume that we're all looking at that cold hard mirror now. What do you see? Are there things you see in scripts that you're like, okay, this person, isn't ready or is ready? I mean, are there red flags, things that pop up? I know you speak a lot about voice, but that's one of those sort of nefarious.
Yes.
You know when you see it, and it's like, well, how do I put my voice in my script? I mean, it's like a really.
Yeah.
Any advice or thought?
I think that I read so much that I usually don't remember what I've read the next day. Like I will talk to a colleague about a script that I read, that we both read together, like the night before, and neither of us can even remember what it's about, because you've read 10 things the night before and you're just like, yeah, it was that half hour thing, I don't know, it was like a workplace comedy. Like if there's nothing that really distinguishes it, that's the first problem. Like I've read, hundreds of half-hour scripts that are about a young girl from this small town who moves here because she got dumped and she's at this like dead-end job, and and it's like, fine, I've read it a million times. If it's not really fucking funny or really something that I can latch onto, I'm not going to remember it. It's just like a workplace comedy that I read last night. The things that I can't, and I do think sometimes, and I don't want to say just come up with the craziest concept ever and that will make it good, but there are things that I've read that are such a good idea that maybe they're not as good of a writing sample, but they're so funny, or they're so weird, or they're so different that I remember liking it more, or I pitch it and it sounds funnier than what it actually was, and that makes it memorable. So like I would give you an example. There's a script that went around that everybody loved, and I remember reading it and being like, it's pretty good, but like everyone freaked out over it, and I remember by the end being like, yeah, the script's great. And like I remember that shift because I remember not liking it as much when I was reading it, and it's just my opinion. It's a good script and a lot of people truly did love it, but it was called like Zarwar Jones or something, and it was like my God, now this is going to sound terrible, but I'm going to pitch it anyways. It was about this, and it was very insider baseball, so again, I'm not encouraging you to write something like this, but I remember it, and I'm telling you, I just don't remember anything that I read. But it was about this terrorist who moved to America because he gets staffed on a TV show, and that was like the goal of the terrorist, was to put this kid on this TV show because that was like how he was going to brainwash America. And so he gets on this TV show. It's like the biggest American sitcom, whatever the show was in this particular pilot. And he's in the room, and so the terrorists are calling him, and they're like, okay, like, where's your writing? Like, you're supposed to like put this in the show, and you're supposed to be putting this plot line in the show. And he's like, guys, it's really hard to get my pitches accepted in this particular And so like there becomes this whole thing, and there's also a bit of him finding an agent. So like, again, it's very insider baseball, but basically there's this whole thing about how they like tell him if he doesn't get a pitch in, like he has to make an episode somehow about gorgonzola cheese, or they're gonna come in and like bring him back to like the country where he's from. And so like there's this whole great scene of him like literally everything they're pitching on the show, he's like, but what if it was with gorgonzola cheese? And anyway, it's much better, it's like way better than I'm pitching it, but maybe it's not. But I remember it, you know, and I think that a lot of these pilots, and they don't have to be comedies, but the ones that you remember, and I'll give you a completely different example. You know, I have a client, and I signed him off of this script. It was called Let the Evil Go West, and it's a horror Western. And it was just a really, really phenomenal piece of writing, but it was also a horror Western, and not very many people are writing horror Westerns. It's like There Will Be Blood meets The Shining. It's a really cool script, and I signed him off of it because I just never really read anything like it, and it was a bitch and a half to get a producer on it. Nobody wanted to make this movie because nobody wants to see a horror Western. It's just not a $1 billion idea. It doesn't sound like a $1 billion movie, business, whatever. And it was, but everyone loved the script. I sent the script out, and everyone loved it, and everyone agreed it was this phenomenal piece of writing, but no one really knew what to do with him, so he wasn't really being offered jobs off of this particular sample because it was so specific. So we were in this like pattern of like trying to, and eventually I begged a producer to just take a shot, and I asked him to send it to 10 directors because I was convinced that if he sent it to 10 directors that they would all want to do it. And you know, I wasn't telling him to go to George Clooney, who, by the way, did attach to the script later and then dropped off, but that's not really the point. The point is, he was just going out to like indie filmmakers, and I told him, I was like, it is that good. You just have to send it to a filmmaker, and I can't do that. And anyway, all of that's a very long-winded way of saying, like, it was an incredible piece of writing because it took a risk, and because it mixed genres, and because it did something different. And I think that if you are just telling a character story, if you are just going to write, you know, a character that goes from point A to point B, and it's a little character drama, and you don't really want to say anything more than whatever this character goes through for 118 pages, it just better be that fucking good, because those are coming through all the time. And if you I don't want to tell you to write, you know, a terrorist comedy or to write a horror Western, but I just think that you have to be keeping in mind that, like, if you're writing a half-hour workplace sitcom, that there needs to be something about it that's going to differentiate it, because everyone else is writing that pilot as well, and you have to remember that as you're writing it. And I also think the other piece of advice, and I think I said this earlier, is just like, especially with comedy, those first 5 pages have to be amazing. I think with anything, the first 5 pages really they have to be really, really, really good. I think your first page has to be really good. I give it 5 or 10 or 15, but like some people give it 2, and they really do, and you have one shot to get read. But I also, and I really do believe this, I think that good writing does rise to the top. I think that It might take you a couple tries to get someone to read it who will actually give it to someone who is meaningful, but I do think that when the writing is good, you will find someone who will agree and who can pass it along to the right people, but it just has to be that good.
Well, that's the last question before I turn it over. How do you know it's good? I mean, because like you're suffering in relative obscurity, and
right.
we all know, we've all handed over to script competitions and had some nobody judge give us feedback that is dreadful,
mm-hmm.
or 3 different types of feedback that comes back and it's like, well, I don't know what to think now. At what point do you, and there are plenty of writers who are like, I know in my gut this is good, and their gut's wrong.
Right.
So what?
Well, a couple things. I mean, look, like you need to be getting your script read by people who you actually think have good taste and good opinions. Like, if you're just sending the script to your aunt and uncle and they're telling you it's great, like that doesn't really mean anything. And I, by the way, I say that because,
your aunt and uncle suck.
Well, it's
No, I agree.
I think that if you have 30 people giving you, the other thing too is I think sometimes you feel like one person tells you a note and you make the change. That's probably not enough people telling you that note for it to make sense. I think you want to be getting your writing read by a lot of different people, but also by people who you trust and who and not just because they're in your writing group or they're a writer that you know. Like, you need to actually feel like they're going to give you constructive criticism, because if you have 5 friends who are just fine, who are just reading it to give you an opinion because those are the only 5 writers that you know, that's not good enough. But conversely, if everyone around you is telling you that you have a structure problem or you have a character problem, you probably do. At that point. And I think that that's the other thing that's hard too, is being able to sacrifice your babies. I tried writing at one point when I was an assistant, and I had so many people tell me the same note, and I just didn't want to hear it because I was like, no, they're all wrong. But they were probably right. I also shouldn't be a writer, so there's that too. But I think that's really hard to, if there's something that you're really married to in your writing, but everyone is telling you it's not working, it's not working.
One idea that we've discussed here is if you're sure of what your emotional core of your story is, like what you want your story to be about, like the journey of the character or what it is, the scenes become less important. Do you know what I mean? Like the
yes.
individual babies become less significant. As long as you're staying true to your underlying core, then you can start to fuck around with how you get there, and it's when the feedback is starting to mess with the core, then you can start to be like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. But if the people giving you the feedback are in tune with what you're trying to say, they just think you should say it in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It's sort of easier to let your babies go. That's one piece of advice that I've received and I share. But yeah, and also the other thing for me that I've learned, just to give you my 2 cents, is that if people are arguing with you about structure and this doesn't make any sense and why would that character do that kind of stuff, then it's like, okay, I have problems. If they're starting to be like, I didn't like what that character did in that scene, or that she made that choice, and I was really angry at her for doing that, and so therefore I hate your script, then that's them filtering the script through their own experience and their own lens, which means the rest of it's working. It's now you're getting down into individual taste, which 100% of people are never going to love your script, right? So if you can get people, I've found if you can get people in the feedback phase to start to be complaining about the character as a person, like, why would she do that? I wanted her to be together with him, or then it's like, then they're seeing them as people, they're seeing them as that they exist, and they exist in the structure of a story. And now they're quibbling with you about stuff that you can obviously have a conversation with, but that sort of means the rest of it is kind of okay.
Yeah.
So that's, take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I also think too, though, that, you can write things for 2 reasons. You can write things because you really want the thing to get made, or you can write something because it's just a really, really great sample. And I think if the first thing that you're looking for is representation, like, I will tell you, I do not care if the thing that I'm reading is producible or not. Like, it is not, I do not care about that at all. So it's not something that I'm even remotely weighing in my mind when I read something, because if the script is good and it's not producible, I can find them another job where the thing is producible. And actually, that's too cynical. I'm not going to say that, but it's you know. So I think that if you want to tell a particular story and you know it's going to be great, but you don't see how it could ever get made, that's okay. Because I think that at least in the first step of just getting representation, it's way more important that the thing is just good than that it will sell. Because there are a lot of other ways, once you've found a representative to book a job, than just from your own original work, and you can work with your rep to figure out what your next original idea is that maybe can be producible. But I think the first thing that you're writing, if there's a great idea that you have, but it's, you know, even if it's literally, you know, you could never make it because, like, okay, we have another, there's another client at Kaplan Perrone that got really, like, a lot of buzz off the script he wrote called Reagan, which could never get made without literally Reagan's approval, probably, because the whole thing is basically about how he's suffering from, I think, dementia during his term as president, and so everyone around him basically figures out that the only way that they can get him to do the job of president is to pretend that he's an actor again, and that everything he's doing are like lines in a movie. And so the whole thing is like wrapped in that. It's also actually it has like a ton of emotion and heart, but the whole idea, like, you can't make that movie. Like, and they actually ended up trying. They ended up getting Will Ferrell attached, which I think is the only way you can make that movie. And then Reagan's people came out and were like, you can't make this movie. They shut it down. But it didn't matter. Like, he booked so much work, got represented, like all these things off that script. So.
All right. Just quickly, how many scripts do you think a writer should have written before they start to think about representation and all that? Just a quick, like, are your one script will do, or do you really feel they need to like work through a few to get the iron out of the box? Just a quickly one, because I know we have to go.
I don't know.
You don't care?
No, not necessarily.
So one script would be enough. If it's a good one, that's
yes.
it. Okay. Anybody have any questions for Hannah while we're here? Apart from how do I get you to read my script?
Yeah.
No. I have one more, and then we'll end. The fight with the agents, the Writers Guild and the agencies are fighting. Has that impacted your business and your job? Is your job shifting? You can be honest. We're friends here. We're not recording.
No, I mean, look, that's not really our battle.
No, but I've heard from other managers that it's like, my job is now suddenly so much busier. I'm like doing so much more because I've taken on more responsibility for my clients, or I'm sort of.
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess maybe that's true because I don't have a partner who's co-representing some of my clients, but it's not like the work has necessarily changed. It's I guess maybe my assistant has to set more meetings because he's not setting the schedule with an agent as well. But I also have plenty of clients that don't have agents, so for them it hasn't changed at all. But yeah, I mean, look, I've heard that too, and I think people are potentially busier because they don't have someone to share the workload with like they used to. But I'm still kind of doing everything that I was doing for my clients before, and really just hoping that they can figure it out and we can go back to whatever normal is.
This week's normal. And the last one. Spec, if you're looking to write something, obviously you don't care what it is, whether it's a feature or a TV, just as long as it's good.
Yes.
And is anybody buying spec features? Are people actually selling stuff, or is it really just about the sample that you can then get other work nowadays? That's sort of where we're at.
I think occasionally, but I think look, like in the theatrical business and at the major studios, it's very, very hard to sell an original idea. I think you can kind of see that with how many sequels and prequels and spin-offs there are in theaters. So unfortunately, I think that selling a spec script is really hard. It's not to say that it doesn't happen, and I think it probably happens more than people think it happens, but still less than maybe what it used to be. But I think at the same time, if you go beyond the larger studios, I think there is a real market for spec scripts with like more of the indie financiers and things like that. I think it's different in television, but on the feature side, I think, yeah.
So you're optimistic if you're a writer trying to break through?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Thank you for coming in.
Of course.
Just before we clap and leave, I do script consulting, so if you want to pay me, I can give you opinions on your scripts. I'm hoping that tonight has proved that I'm not a complete dummy. I know there's a lot of controversy about consultants and paying people to get ideas and opinions, and I'm incredibly skeptical about a lot of people too. So if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them, and obviously I'm ridiculously transparent. So that's one thing. Two, I do a workshop where we work on emotional connection and characters. We've just started one now. What we do is we have 4 actors come along each week, and the writers come in and they get given an exercise during the course of the week, all aimed at trying to free you from whatever script that's currently strangling you. So you just, we call it like a writer's gym, where you just do exercises, you create characters that don't exist right now, you put them in scenarios that don't exist or that are inherently ridiculous, and you can just sort of be free and have fun. And what we found is that we're starting to see some writers who are actually developing ideas based on that, because they've been sort of loosened. So the current one's full, but the next one starts in October, so email me if you're interested in doing that. We meet on Wednesday nights at Raleigh Studios. You've already liked us you're already following us on Instagram, so that's good. And the next competition will open whenever I get around to opening it, which will be in the next week or so. And our next insider will be an independent producer, who's already lined up. But I'll announce all that in October. So if you want to enter your 30 pages to do this, I'll let you know. I'm hoping that you're all on the email list. So that's the sales pitch from me. Hannah, thank you so much. Now we can clap.